everybody, in this video what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the notion of negations, ways that we can express negations in English, whether it be by prefixes, suffixes, phrases, or terms. And then I'm going to talk about some of the things that we can do with negations, like the rules double negation, modus tollens, and also indirect proof. Okay, now we're going to get into the notion of negations. And negations are kind of weird because they're connective too, just like arrows and ands, just like if-then statements and conjunctions, but they modify a bit differently. They don't modify dyadically, which is to say, what I mean by that is, like with arrows, you can't have like a arrow and then just that, like if this then and then nothing else. You can't have that. You can't say a and then nothing else. Okay. With negations, you can just modify one statement. So if I say something like today is Monday. Okay, I decided to do this. How would I represent this? This would just be M. But on the other hand, if I say today is not, and so here's the modifier. If I say today is not Monday, here's the way this gets represented. So this is the contrary to this. If M stands for today is Monday, here's how we do today is not Monday. We write the same thing, and we go, we're going to use this symbol here, the squiggle, to mean not. All right, technically this is the tilde, like you see in over the N in a word like jalapeno. We use this in front of the letter to modify it. So if I say today is not Monday, this M here just means today is Monday. If I want to say today is not Monday, in front of that letter, I'm going to put this squiggle. And so this means today is not Monday. Okay, now there are a couple different ways to say this. Okay, this squiggle here. I could say it's false that today is Monday. Same thing. It's not true that today is Monday. Today isn't Monday. And all those things I just said would still be this. Well, let's take a look at another example here in terms of getting what negations are and how we represent them. So let's say I had this. Let's say I said Augusta, as in the city, is not in South Carolina. Turns out this whole statement itself is true. And let's say I've got this here. Okay, so we took the first letter of the underlined word to stand for the statement. So what would A mean? If I just wrote A, this would be Augusta is in South Carolina. That's not true. Since this not is in here, what does this not do? We want to say this statement, as I have it here in quotation marks, would be squiggle A. What does that mean? Augusta is not in South Carolina. Other ways I could say it. It's false that Augusta is in South Carolina. It's not true that Augusta is in South Carolina. Okay? Could also Augusta isn't. I could use a contraction to say the negation here. It isn't. Augusta isn't in South Carolina. Which leads me to my next point. There are actually a ridiculous amount of ways to indicate a negation in English, and I'm going to go over some of them now. Alright, now what I want to do is go over some of the ways, which there are a ridiculous amount, but some of the ways in which we can indicate a negation in English. So let's start with phrases. Those are the easiest ones. So things like just sticking the word not in a sentence. Okay, this is not the case. We can say that we just stick the word not. I already talked about a couple. These are longer, windier phrases. I could say things like it is false that. Okay. I could say it's not true, or it is not true that, and then say whatever it is that you want to say. And all of these results are going to get you a squiggle with whatever it is you're dealing with. So here's a few. The word not, sometimes the word no. Okay, the word no instead of the word not. So, you know, I might say something like, you know, it's no cakewalk. So is it a cakewalk? No, it's not. Right. So sometimes we use the word no instead of not. Sometimes that's true in more in certain dialects than others. But I'll just say sometimes we use the word no just to mean not. I don't mean no by itself. Okay, the word no itself can indicate a negation. Do you want to go to the party? No. So you do not want to go to the party. Yes. Okay, that's fine. But sometimes we'll stick the word no in. This is rarer, but we do this in English. Okay, so these are just a couple of the ways here. Phrases, and all these would result in a squiggle. Okay, so if I said something like, today is Monday. Okay, let's say I had that. Today is Monday. And if I had M with a squiggle in front of it, I could actually read back, oh, today is not Monday. It's false that today is Monday. It's not true that today is Monday. All right, maybe today is no Monday. Okay, I could do that as well. So those are a couple of ways that I could indicate a negation by adding some phrases. That's not all. Let's talk about the next easiest one, suffixes. Now let's take a look at suffixes that can mean not. So let's start with this one, less. Okay, if I say something like you are heartless. Okay, and let's take just the word heart there. You have heart. What would that be? H. You got heart. Okay, you care. But if I say your heart less, do you have heart? No, you don't. Okay. If I say you are careless. Okay, so then we got a suffix less. Let's take C there, like you are, and here we change it in the positive form. We'd say something like you care or you are caring. That's what C would mean. You care, you are caring. So sometimes the exact grammar switches around a bit. But this, on the other hand, you are careless. Do you care? You do not care. You are careless. That's what this would mean. Okay? So we can have suffixes where it indicates a negation. So really the main one, and only real suffix in English, is less. There is another one that's kind of a suffix of sorts, but it's actually a contraction. Let's take a look at that one. So in addition to the suffix less, we've also got these two suffixes that we can put. Sometimes we put just the word not on the end of a word, and sometimes the contraction on the end of a word. So that one's technically a contraction. This one's not. It's not just not. It's not a contraction. So you like these two. Like I can say, if I can say, let's take this. I can do that. Okay. No negation here. So let's just say, let's take that D. If I can say I can do that, bam, D. But I can say, and here's where it's the word not is itself a suffix. I can say I cannot. One word, I cannot do that. How would I represent that? D with a squiggle in front of it. Can I do that? No, I cannot. All right, I cannot do that. But I could also say the same thing with a contracted form. I can't do that. And there, this, I guess it's not technically a suffix, but we have this contraction here on the end. This means I can't do that. So there's all kinds of words I can think of that have that in it. So we've got like can't, cannot, all right, don't, won't, will not. Okay, some older ones, shan't, shall not. Okay, wouldn't, couldn't, and so on. And then the perfectly fine in English, ain't. In fact, what is ain't short for? It is short for am not. Okay, not amped, because that would be too difficult to say. Ain't is perfectly fine. This went out of fashion a couple hundred years ago when, if you look among elites hundreds of years ago, they said ain't to be short for am not. As soon as poor people started using it all the time, it became out of fashion, right? Improper English. It's fine, okay? And it means am not. So all these, though, are instances here. These NTs on the end, these contracted NTs, these, of course, are short for not, and they indicate a negation. So look out for these. Now, on a quiz, anything here that indicates a negation is going to be italicized, just like I've italicized the ifs and the thens, just like I've italicized the ands. Anything that indicates a not, I'm going to end up italicizing on a quiz. So you shouldn't have to dig for it. It'll be there a little bit more obviously than it would be when you normally encounter these things out in the world. But now, let's look at the next element that can indicate negation, which are prefixes. And in English, this is absolutely ridiculous. Now, again, it'll be italicized here too when it comes to prefixes, but we have so many prefixes in English that can mean not. Check this out. All right, now let's take a look at, here's some prefixes that can mean not in English. Okay, just a handful. Okay, look at these. There's so many. Now these come from all different kinds of roots, and that's part of the problem. And they don't always mean not. That's also an issue. So if I say something like, so-and-so was anti-establishment. Okay? Are they establishment? Are they pro-establishment? No, they are not. So here, the way to figure out if this is a negation or not is, if you take it away, does it mean the opposite? So if I take out anti here, okay, if I say someone is anti-establishment, are they for the establishment? They're not for the establishment. But if I say something like, in your bloodstream you have antibodies, okay, are antibodies the opposite of bodies? No. So here it doesn't mean negation. Okay, so this is where what you want to look out for is to see if I take the prefix and I cover it, does it mean the opposite of the word that I'm using? Okay, so let's take a look at another one, like non. Okay, so if someone says they're a non-smoker, okay, sometimes this gets a hyphen, sometimes it doesn't. Okay, if someone's a non-smoker, do they smoke? No, they do not. Okay, so if I covered the prefix here, okay, looks like smoker, non-smoker, those are two opposite things. But also there are words that start with non that are not negations. Like here's one, just look this one up in the dictionary. I don't want to explain this one because this one's ridiculous. Okay, nonplussed. Look it up. All right, you'll find that this is the definition of the word is frustrating, and looks like it could mean either what you think it should mean or the opposite of that. That's frustrating. Let's take a look at the next couple of prefixes here. Okay, next couple of prefixes. Let's take a look at im. So im can mean not. So if I say something is impossible, okay, if something is impossible, is it possible? No, it is not. That's what impossible means. It's not possible. But not everything with I am on the front means not. So I can think of a couple of others. I could say someone is immodest. Okay, sometimes they get an extra consonant. Okay, someone's immodest. Are they modest? No, they are not. I could say something is immediate. Okay, this one a little less straightforward. If it's immediate, something happens immediately, there is no medium. There's nothing that happens in between. Okay, that's what a medium would be. Okay? But sometimes I am on the front of a word does not mean not. So for example, if one word doesn't mean not, so consider this. So all these here, the prefix means not, and I can think of a couple, I can think of several others. There are lots of this in English. But if I said that someone is impoverished, okay, here, impoverished, does this mean they're not in poverty? No. If someone's impoverished, it means they are in poverty. Okay, so when it comes to im, if these mean not, like these do here on a quiz, these are going to be italicized. But here's an example of a word. It starts with im, but it doesn't mean not here. Okay, let's take a look at in. Same thing. In. When does it mean not? When does it not? It can do both. Let's take a look. So when it comes to in, think about this. I could say that somebody is insane. Now what does that mean? The in here means not. So if I say somebody's insane, it means they're not sane. On the other hand, I could say that the pieces of a puzzle were intact. Does that mean they were not tact? No, it doesn't. So here it doesn't mean not. So again, if you cover up the prefix, and it means and what you get, what's left, is the opposite of the thing, then it means that you've got a negation here. If it does that, like here, like is the opposite of intact tact? No. Let's take a look at something else. Like if I say that, our efforts were ineffective. Were they effective? No, they were not. So this means not. But on the other hand, if I could say, oh, I play a musical instrument, does that mean I don't play a strument? No. So here it doesn't mean not. So again, look for, if you were to cover up the prefix, does it mean not? And if you cover the prefix and it means the opposite of the thing you're looking at, then you've got a negation. If it means something else, then you don't have a negation. Alright, so that's with in. Let's take a look at un. Alright, let's take a look at un. Un's also a little bit different too. So un can mean not. So it can. So if I say, for example, that you're unkind, okay, what does that mean? You're not kind. But it can do two different things here. One, in addition to that, so here it's definitely a negation. If I say, so-and-so is kind, and we'll say that, X was kind, we'll just say that's K. X was unkind, squiggle K. Okay, that's how I represent that. But there are two other things that un can do that I just want you to pay attention to. One is, it can be the same prefix, un, but it doesn't mean not. It means something else entirely. So if I said, for example, undo that, okay, to undo something, for example, Control Z, undo, it doesn't mean that you didn't do it or don't do it. It means that you take it back. If I tell you to untie your shoes, I'm not telling you not to tie your shoes. It means that you're taking what you did and putting it in reverse. Okay, so here are instances where un does not mean not. And then, for example, and just look out for this one, what's actually going on here is something different, but I just want you to pay attention to it. In a word like united, okay, does united mean not ited? No. Now what's going on here is actually the prefix is not un, the prefix is uni, okay, from the Latin unus meaning one. Okay, so if you're united, we're all one together. The university is where we learn about the one verse or something like that. Okay, so here something different's actually going on. It's actually a different prefix, but it just looks like the other one. Here the meaning is different, but if you can look at something like unkind or unhelpful, were they full of help? No. Okay, that would mean not in those instances. Okay, and then let's take a look at a. Okay, now let's take a look. Just the letter A on the front of a word can mean not. So, for example, if someone believes in the existence of a deity, that person is a theist. If someone does not believe in the existence of a deity, that person is an atheist. And this negation actually comes from Greek. So in Greek, if you want to say not something, okay, then you put an alpha in front of it. For example, in Greek, there is, let's see, letheia. Okay, I think it might be, yeah, letheia. There we go, letheia. This means forgettable. So something letheia, for example, in Greek mythology, when you die and you cross the Leth River, you forget all about your former life. Okay, so letheia means you can forget it. If something is aletheia, it's unforgettable. And in fact, that is the Greek word for truth. Literally, it means unforgettable in Greek. Here, I'll put that there for you in English too. Aletheia. Okay, so unforgettable. That's literally what that means. You cannot forget it. So there we hear that un in English that it means not. We have a couple of other instances of this in English. For example, this shows up, and this is where things get kind of confusing sometimes. Like I could say, we could talk about morals. People will say that something is immoral, and usually that means it's wrong, but someone could say that something is amoral, which means we're just off the charts. We're doing something else entirely altogether. So both of these mean not moral. The nuances in English are a little bit different. The point is that sometimes letter A on the beginning of a word means not, but not always. For example, if I have an apple, that does not mean not pull. Okay? So keep that in mind. Let's take a look at IR now. So IR can sometimes mean not. So for example, in a word like this one, if I say, hey, you know what? You were irresponsible. What does that mean? Not responsible. But if I say, oh, early farmers figured out the notion of irrigation, this does not mean not regation. Okay? Or if you stirred up my ire, that does not mean that you stirred up my eh. Okay, so IR in the front of a word doesn't always mean not, but it, like here, not responsible, irresponsible. Irrespective, not to the respect of, and stuff like that. So sometimes IR means not, so just look out for it. And like I said again, just to repeat, it'll always be italicized on a quiz when it means not, so you don't have to hunt for it, but I want you to be aware of it. Alright, now let's take a look at the prefix ab. So ab can mean not. Actually, in Latin, it means just like away. All right, to go away. So, for example, we had abductive logic. It means to lead away. If you're abducted, you're taken away. Okay, so it can mean that. So I can really think of only one instance where in English, just because of the way that we're using the word, it means not. So if you say something is abnormal, there it seems like it can mean not normal. Really, what's literally happening here is saying it's away from normal. But I think the way that we use something like abnormal, it's meaning not normal for us today. That's not the literal meaning of the prefix, but it can come up. But I can really think of it only in this instance. So on the other hand, like, you have muscles in your stomach that are called abdominal muscles. That does not mean that they are not dominal. That's not the point. Right, so sometimes ab might mean not. Like I said, on a quiz, it'd be italicized if it does. Let's take a look at one more. Dis. Alright, finally, let's take a look at the prefix dis. Alright, so dis can mean not. Okay, so if I say we disagree, okay, do we agree? We do not. Okay, so in instances like this, okay, where we agree, we disagree. We agree, we do not agree. Here it means not. It doesn't always. Sometimes the word dis or the prefix dis just means bad. Like in this word, okay, if I say the word disaster, literally, aster, it means like astro, like star. Like that's where that comes from, like astro, like astronomy or astrology. Literally, astro means star and dis means bad. So if something's a disaster, like the stars are bad. Like I can think of Romeo and Juliet being star-crossed lovers. Their horoscopes were bad. This is literally what the word disaster means. Like the stars are not good here. They're bad. Okay. And so here, but really, dis in this instance means something like bad. All right. So if I say things where like I said, if it's a disaster, that means it's literally bad stars. I could also say something like this, where I could say I'm just disappointed in you. Does that mean not exactly? Like there's a negative connotation here, but if I say I'm disappointed in you, it does not mean I'm appointed. I'm not appointed in you. That's not what it means. So what I want you to look for is, again, when does it mean not? And there are very specific instances of this. Here it means not. Here it means bad. Here, literally, the etymology is getting at something bad, but the way we use it in English, disappointed is not the contrary or the opposite of appointed. Okay? Or if I say something's... There can be other examples. If I say something is disproportionate, is it proportionate? No, it's not. So there, it's a negation. But on the other hand, if I say, like, there was dissent, okay, not dissent like going downwards, but dissent in the sense that people are speaking up about things, this kind of dissent, okay? Is that the opposite of sent? No. So here it doesn't mean not. Okay, so those are just some of the instances in English where we've got prefixes that can mean not. We've talked about suffixes that can mean not. We've talked about contractions that can mean not. We've talked about some phrases that can mean not. So now what this means is we got to watch out for these. And like I said, on your quizzes, any instance where this is happening will be italicized. So it won't have to be guesswork. But I just want you to pay attention to when this is going on in the world, like when people are talking, when you see people on the news, when you watch people on YouTube, when you see people talking about things, well, pay attention. Are they using negations? And then I'll say a few more things about negations and the things that we can do with them here in a bit. All right. Finally, when it comes to things to know about negations in terms of translation, we've talked about a lot of the prefixes, suffixes, phrases that can mean not. Now let's talk about this word, unless. Now, first of all, just looking at this, it looks ridiculous. This is like a Frankenstein's monster of a word. So, we've already established is a prefix that means not. Less, we've established is a suffix that means not. So on the surface, it looks like unless should be a word that means not. It does not. Here's what it means. Whatever follows unless, so when you see the word unless, whatever follows it goes on the left side of an arrow. So here's an arrow. It goes on the left side of an arrow. So the unless stuff goes here with a squiggle in front of it. Okay? So whenever you see unless, it goes on the left, whatever follows it goes on the left side of an arrow with a squiggle in front of it, regardless of how much is there. So let's take a look at an example. So let's say I said this. We're going to win the championship and then we see this word unless. That means we do something with this unless somebody on the team messes up. There we go. We got this. We're going to win the championship unless somebody on the team messes up. So, what we do is whatever follows the, I'm going to say the phrase, even though it's a word, whatever follows the phrase unless goes on the left side of an arrow with a squiggle in front of it. So when we see this, we're going to win the championship unless somebody on the team messes up. First of all, that tells us, let's make an arrow. Okay? Then whatever follows unless, here it is. Whatever follows unless goes on the left side of the arrow with a squiggle in front of it. So, what follows unless here? Somebody on the team messes up. So that's M. But it said, whatever follows unless goes on the left side of the arrow with a squiggle in front of it. Okay? Whatever's left goes on the right side. So, here it is. This says here, we're going to win the championship unless somebody on the team messes up, which means if somebody on the team doesn't mess up, then we're going to win the championship. And that's what unless means. Unless basically means the same thing as if not. So if somebody doesn't mess up, then we're going to win the championship. So unless somebody messes up, we're going to win the championship. Both of those mean the same thing. And so that's what unless means. Okay, let's take a look at another example with unless. This one says, unless library books are returned by the due date, late fees shall accrue. So here's what we do. Whatever follows unless goes on the left side of an arrow with a squiggle in front of it. So we see the word unless, that means there is going to be an arrow. So whatever follows unless goes on the left side of an arrow with a squiggle in front of it. So what follows unless? Library books are returned by the due date. Okay, so library books are returned by the due date. That goes in on the left side of the arrow with a squiggle in front of it. And then whatever follows goes on the right side. Late fees shall accrue. So here's what this is saying. Squiggle R, arrow A means unless library books are returned by the due date, late fees shall accrue. Which is the same thing as saying if you don't return library books by the due date. So there's that not. If you don't return library books by the due date, then late fees shall accrue. If you can't return library books, whatever way that we want to put the not on here, it means if you don't do this, then this is going to happen. And that's what unless means. Unless is the same thing as saying if not. Okay, let's take a look at another example where it's slightly more complicated. Okay, that is, we'll have more terms. Let's take a look. All right, let's take a look at my next example here. I have this. If you'll be a junior next semester. That comma there means something. You should submit your rising junior portfolio unless you've already taken writing in the university. Okay, so that first if means, oh, here's an arrow. Okay, whatever follows if goes on the left side of the arrow. So what follows if? You'll be a junior next semester. Okay, so if you'll be a junior next semester, then what? You should submit your rising junior portfolio unless you've already taken writing in the university. Now that unless means there is another arrow, and that means this stuff is going to be together. Unless what? So whatever follows unless goes on the left side of an arrow with a not in front of it. So unless you've already taken writing in the university. So taking writing in the university would be W, and then squiggle that. Now here's what's important here. This squiggle goes with the left side of this arrow. It doesn't want to go outside here. It goes here. It's modifying this, and not the whole thing. It's modifying this. So unless, or if you haven't taken writing in the university, then you should submit your rising junior portfolio. So here's what it says. This says, as it originally is presented here, if you'll be a junior next semester, okay, you should submit your rising junior portfolio unless you've already taken writing in the university. So here's another way of saying it. If you'll be a junior next semester, then if you haven't taken writing in the university, then you should submit your rising junior portfolio. Okay? So that's how this works. Now, the important thing here, too, is to recognize that the squiggle goes here with this, not out here. So here's what this would say. Like if you accidentally put the squiggle on the outside of this, something like this. Here's what this would say. It does not say this. This is correct. This works. This does not work. Here's what this one says. This one says, if you'll be a junior next semester, then if you've taken writing in the university, then you should submit your Rising Junior portfolio, not, or another way of putting it is if you'll be a junior next semester, then it's not the case that if you've taken writing in the university, you should submit your Rising Junior portfolio. This is not correct at all. Okay? So when we're talking about negations, they only modify the thing that they're supposed to modify. So in here, unless it modifies just the left side of the arrow, it doesn't modify this, and it doesn't modify the whole thing, the whole right side. It just modifies the left side zoomed in into this part. It just modifies the left side of this arrow, not anything else. Okay, let's take a look at a few examples of proofs now, where we'll get into looking at some new rules as well. All right, so what are the things that we can do with negations? So this will include double negation, Modus Tollens, and indirect proof. All right, the first rule that I want to look at here is double negation. Now, double negation is a rule of substitution. This means, like in this situation, you can go backwards and forwards with what we're going to get. So far, all the rules that we've done have been rules of inference. What that means is if you have a certain criteria, then you can pump something out of it. So like if you have, like with arrow out, if you have an arrow, you have the left side of the arrow, then you can get the right side. But you need those special conditions to make this happen. Double negation as a rule of substitution is something that we can really always use as long as we have something. So let's talk about a ridiculous example of when we can use it and how it works. So let's say I had A as an assumption. And let's say A stands for it is possible. Whatever the it is we're referring to. Let's just say A stands for it is possible. At any time that you want, you can put a double set of negations onto that and it means the same thing. Now that doesn't seem like it'll be useful, but it will be, and especially it'll be more useful in reverse. So what that means is if I have it's possible, I can just slap really any even number of negations onto that. So if I've got A, I can say I've got squiggle squiggle A. How? Double negation line 1. So this is kind of silly, but here's what this means. If I've got it's possible, it's the same thing as saying squiggle squiggle A would be the same thing as saying is it's not, okay, not means not, obviously. It's not impossible. And sometimes we'll do this in English for emphasis. So squiggle, squiggle, A. Okay, if I say it's possible, that's the same thing as saying it's not impossible. Why would I do this? Well, if I told you solve, if you have A, solve for squiggle, squiggle A, that would be the perfect time to do this. But that also means I can do this in reverse. If I had just squiggle, squiggle A. Okay, so you have an assumption. It's not impossible. I want you to prove that it's possible then. Oh, I can say, hey, line 2, A. Double negation, line 1. So here's the deal. The way double negation works is as long as you have an even set of squiggles, it's always the same thing as having no squiggles. So look at this. Even if I had not, A. Okay, that's 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. If I have an even number of squiggles, okay, it's the same thing as having no squiggles. Okay, double negation on line 1. On the other hand, if I had an odd number of squiggles, no matter how many, if I had, let's say, 11 squiggles, it's the same thing as having 1. Okay, so if I had not A, well, basically, these cancel out, 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 but this one's left. So if you have an odd number of squiggles, the one that's remaining still pertains. So if I had 11 nots A, it's the same thing as saying not A. We do that. Well, I didn't not do that, like that kind of language you might use here. So double negation works either way. So the reason why you might want to use it is in this situation. Let's say I said you had B arrow, squiggle, squiggle A. You've got B. Okay, these are your assumptions. And I want you to solve for, we'll get A by itself. So can we do an arrow out here? We can. That would get us squiggle, squiggle A, arrow out, 1 and 2. But is this what I want here? Is it A? Well, logically, yeah. Is it exactly that? No, it's squiggle, squiggle A. Can I convert this into something else? Yes. Here's what happens here. I can say, hey, I can convert this thing into just plain vanilla A, double negation, line 3. And that's when double negation becomes useful. When you need to convert something, you have the ability to do so. And those conversions are basically the same thing as converting between it is possible to it's not impossible. And like I said, in English, we actually use those things to offer a different kind of nuance. Like, will we win? It's not impossible. Well, Coach, why didn't you say it's possible? I could have said that, but I was saying this to say it's not impossible. It means something a little bit different. Logically, it's equivalent, but in English out loud, or even in writing, it has a little bit of a different nuance. Okay, the logical syntactic meaning is identical, but we will say things like this. You can't not do that. Well, so can I do it? Well, yeah. But there are other dialects of English, say African American Vernacular English or AAVE, where saying a double negation does not in fact mean double negation. So if I said something in AAVE like I ain't do nothing, that doesn't mean, oh, I did something. That means, no, I really didn't do anything. That's what it means in that particular dialect. And so depending on the dialect of English that's in place, these rules may not apply. But at least in standard English, double negation functions in this way. So let's translate a few statements where we got some negations going on. So I might say something like this. It's false that. It's false that the governor is both. Ooh, so that means an and is coming. Okay. Is both in Greenville and Charleston. So let's translate a statement like this. It's false that the governor is both in Greenville and Charleston. All right, now, what's false? The governor is in both Greenville and Charleston. So, can the governor, he's in Greenville, the governor, and he's in Charleston. Is he in both those places? No. So that's what's going on here. It's saying this. The governor, he's in Greenville and Charleston? No, he's not. He can't be in both those places at once. So that's what's going on here. Whereas, if I said it's false that the governor is in Greenville and we got this, it's false that, and it's false that, alright, that means something too. The governor is in Charleston. The governor is in Charleston. Oh, that's actually something different. So this would be, it's false that the governor is in Greenville. Okay, he's not in Greenville. And he's not in Charleston. Alright, so this says he's not in Greenville and he's not in Charleston. Maybe he's somewhere else. This says, on the other hand, it's false that the governor is both in Greenville and Charleston. So this is saying he can't be in both these cities at the same time. They're too far apart. He can maybe be there in the same day if he takes a drive, but he can't be there. Is he in both these places at once? No. This is saying he's not here and he's not here. Maybe he's in Columbia. Okay? Or maybe he's anywhere else. Okay? He's in Batesburg. Alright, he could be anywhere. This is saying he can't be in both these places at once. This is saying he's not here and he's not here. So keep that in mind too. So if you see it's false that both, it's saying that two things together as an and cannot go together. Can someone be in Greenville and Charleston at once? No, they cannot. That's what this is saying. Can he be in two places at once? No. This is saying he's not here and he's not here. Two different things. Okay, let's take a look at another example of a negation. All right, let's take a look at this example. This is something you might see in the headline of a newspaper. Drought conditions remain without means something, precipitation. And there, without is doing the work of unless. It means the same thing as unless. So I can replace this with drought conditions remain unless there's precipitation. What does that mean? Well, whatever follows without, in this case, or whatever follows unless, goes on the left side of an arrow with a not in front of it. Okay, so what's following without? Precipitation. What do we do whenever follows unless? We stick it on the left side of an arrow with a squiggle in front of it, and then whatever remains goes on the right side of the arrow. So what this is saying is, if it doesn't rain, then the drought conditions are going to remain or continue. Okay, so this is another example of what we do with something. Again, without here means unless. It's really the same thing. This can pop up as well. Now, we've talked about a couple of examples of negations. We've talked about double negation. Let's look now at Modus Tollens. All right, what I want to look at now is our next rule that I want to talk about, which is Modus Tollendo Tollens. Modus Tollens. The abbreviation for this is going to be MT. Now, we talked about modus ponens. That means mode that affirms, or modus ponendo ponens, mode that affirms by affirming. Modus tollendo tollens means mode that denies by denying. Okay, so it's very similar to modus ponens, but we're going to have to do something different here. So here's the way modus tollens works. It says this. Okay, if you got an arrow, and you've also got the contrary to the right side. If you have these two things, then you can get the contrary of the left side of the arrow. How? Modus tollens 1 and 2. Now here I want to talk about the notions of what it means to be an opposite and what it means to be a contrary. So when we're talking about modus tollens, we're talking about contraries. What is an opposite? So if I say good, what's the opposite of good? It could be bad. It could be evil. If I say what's the opposite of daylight, it might be nighttime or something like that. Contraries are much more explicit. So a contrary is where you have the exact same thing but with a not in front of it. So if I say I've got good, what's the contrary of good? Not good. They're very explicit. So when I say here modus tollens, I've got an arrow, I've got the contrary of the right side. It means not that. Then I can get the contrary of the left side. What do I mean by that? Well, let's take a look at an example in an argument, and then we'll see how modus tollens works. Okay, let's look at an example of modus tollens. This argument says this, so I'm going to translate it as I go, and then we'll see how it's an example of modus tollens. This says, if Sauron requires the one ring, okay, that if means there's an arrow. So arrow this, okay, arrow. Line 1, whatever follows if goes on the left side of the arrow. If Sauron reacquires the one ring, so if he gets the ring back, then he'll regain all of his former power. Actually, just power. If he gets the ring back, he'll reacquire all his power. Assumption number 1. Okay. Assumption number 2, he has not regained all his former power. Line 2. His power, does he have it? No. Okay, assumption number 2. So Modus Tollens tells us in this situation, you got this. If he gets the ring, he'll get his power back. He doesn't have his power back. What does that mean? He has not gotten the ring. So I can say squiggle R, Modus Tollens 1 and 2. So here's what's going on here. If you have an arrow, so this is kind of like arrow out, it's a little bit different, but it's kind of predicated on the same notions. Modus Tollens works this way. If you got an arrow, and you have the contrary of the right side. Again, colloquially, we can kind of say the opposite of the right side. Technically, that's not true, so I'm going to keep using the word contrary. So look at your arrow. Look at the right side of the arrow. Do you have the same thing, but with a squiggle in front of it? Okay, so look at the right side of the arrow. This is the way Modus Tollens works. Modus Tollens works. Look at the right side of the arrow. Look what you got. Do you have the contrary of the right side? If you do, then that means you can get the contrary of the left side, which would be whatever this is with a squiggle in front of it, or vice versa. We'll look at a couple examples of that in a moment. So whereas Modus Ponens, or arrow out, says if you got an arrow and you got the affirmation of the left side, you can get the right. Modus Tollens says if you've got an arrow and you look at the right side and you've got basically the contrary of the right side, then you get the contrary of the left side. Again, you can use the word opposite there instead of contrary. That's technically not precise, so I'm going to try and avoid using it, but I'll do it one more time that way. If you got an arrow and you look at the right side, you got the opposite of the right side, you can get the opposite of the left side. Technically, it's not opposites, it's contraries. That's I want to stick to that point, but nevertheless, that's how Modus Tollens works. So you got and even if we did this with the A arrow B, let me put it this way. Same thing. Let's say I had A arrow B. If you work, you get paid. You work, you get paid. Let's do it Modus Tollens style. You work, you get paid. Oh, you didn't get paid. Well, guess what then? You must not have worked. Modus Tollens. Same kind of argument. Now, there are a couple of formal fallacies where these get mixed up. You can't say, oh, I have the opposite of the left side. That means I have the opposite of the right side. And you can't say, oh, I have the right side. That means I have the left side. Neither one of those works. Those are both fallacies, formal fallacies. Affirming the consequent, denying the antecedent. Neither one of those work. But Modus Tollens works this way again. You've got an arrow. Look at the right side. Do you have its contrary? Yep. P and not P are not friends. So if you're saying this leads to this, and you don't have this, well, then you must not have had the first thing in the first place. And that's the way Modus Tollens works. Now, I also think it's important to say at this point that negations stick with the stuff that we've already been doing. So if I say something, for example, like if it's not Wednesday, then we don't have class. Let's say I said something like that. If it's not Wednesday, then we don't have class. Okay, let's say it's Wednesday is W and we have class is C. This would be squiggle W, arrow, squiggle C. But then let's say I said, oh, it's not Wednesday. As a separate argument. Let's say I said it's not Wednesday. Okay, as its own separate item. Oh, so line 1 we had, if it's not Wednesday, then we don't have class. It's not Wednesday. Second assumption. And what do we know? Well, do we have an arrow? Do we have a left side match? We do. Now here the left side match is bigger. So we had squiggle W. Do we have a match for that? Yeah, we've got squiggle W. That means we get squiggle C. That is still just arrow out line 1 and line 2. So we have an arrow. The left side here is bigger. It's squiggle W. Its left side match is also squiggle W. So now here we can include the squigglage in terms of the matches. All right. If we just had W, that wouldn't work. It works here. Based on the same features here, if I said something like it's not Wednesday and we don't have class, well, those things can break down too. Let's say I had that. I've got a dot. I can break that apart into two things. If I said today's Wednesday and we don't have class, hey, it's not Wednesday, and also we don't have class, and that's and out here for both. The not stays around, so the not modifies, or the squiggle modifies things that we've already been doing since quiz 2. Alright, the final rule that I want to talk about is the notion of an indirect proof. So indirect proof is another emergency situation, kind of like arrow in on the last quiz. So what we do is we see, can we do arrow out? Can we do modus tollens? Can we do and out? Should we do and in? Should we do double negation? And when we ask those questions, if the answer is no, then what we do in that situation is we're going to provisionally assume the opposite or the contrary of the goal. We're going to get a contradiction, any contradiction. What is a contradiction? Well, a contradiction is an and statement. It's a conjunction of something and not that exact same thing. So that's what a contradiction is. It's a something and its contrary. Or we could say more colloquially, and its opposite, but that's not quite accurate. That's why I want to avoid saying that. So let's take a look at this problem, and let's put this into practice here. Let's say we had something like this. Let's say we had squiggle A, arrow B, as an assumption. And we've got squiggle A, arrow, squiggle B as a second assumption. And we want to get just plain old A by itself. Okay, that's what we want to do. Okay, and in fact, this is actually 3A out of your book. That is, it's 3A on page 72. So I'm going to go ahead and do that here to explain indirect proof. So it's page 72, 3A. So we find ourselves in this situation. We got these two assumptions. We want to get this. What do we do? So let's go through now this new modified list. So our new list is this. Can I do an arrow out? If so, do it. Can I do a modus tollens? If so, do it. Can I do an and out? If so, do it. Can I do an and in? Should I do it? Do it. Can I do a double negation? Should I do it? Okay. So let's take a look at this. First of all, do I have any arrows not in parentheses? Let's do the first thing, arrow out. Do I have any arrows not in parentheses? Yep, I got two. I got this one, and I got this one. Okay. Now, the left side of both these arrows is squiggle A. Do I have a squiggle A anywhere? Do I have a left side match? No, I do not. Okay. Moving on. Modus tollens. Now, modus tollens says, hey, if you got arrows, look and see, do you have the contrary of the right sides of your arrows? So now let's look at this again. Okay, what do I want to look for? Here's my arrow. Do I have the contrary of the right side? So look, this first arrow, I've got B. Now the contrary of B would be not B. Do I have a not B anywhere? No. Look at this arrow. The contrary of squiggle B would be just plain vanilla B. Do I have that anywhere? No. Alright, so modus tollens is not happening. Do I have any and outs that I can do? Do I have any do I have any dots anywhere not in parentheses? Nope. Can I build anything together with an and in? Yeah, I could put these things together with an and in. Does that get me anywhere? No. Double negation. Can I add double squiggles anywhere? I could. Like I could turn line 1, I could say line 3. Line 1, squiggle A, arrow B, double squiggle that. Could I do that? Perfectly fine. Doesn't get me anywhere. So what I find myself in is a situation where I'm kind of stuck. Now, before we would say, all right, now at this point, try arrow in. All right, is my goal an arrow? Okay, my goal is A. Is it an arrow? No. So can I provisionally assume the left and get the right? No, I can't, because my goal is not an arrow. So that leads us to this situation. This situation is called indirect proof, or IP. Okay, so here's what you do in this situation. So this is another theorem. When you get stuck, none of these other things apply, you do this. So here's what you do. You provisionally assume the contrary of your goal. Okay, so whatever your goal is, but not that thing. And then you get any contradiction. What is a contradiction? A contradiction is any statement and its contrary. So something plus its opposite. Okay, so to speak. So we're going to try and get that. So first of all, let's start with this. Provisionally assume the contrary of the goal. So what's the goal? The goal right here is A. So what we're going to do is we're going to provisionally assume in line 3, so all provisional assumptions we indent, it's a side quest. We're going to provisionally assume the contrary of our goal. Our goal is A, so what would be the contrary of A, or the quote-unquote opposite of A? Squiggle A. Okay? And that is a provisional assumption. And the goal now is get any contradiction. Anything plus the same thing with a squiggle in front of it. That's what we're going to try and do. That's what a contradiction is. So the way indirect proofs work, so this is what we're starting here in indirect proof, is the last move in an indirect proof is always 100% of the time an and in. We say something and not the exact same thing. So that's the goal. We do that, we can prove that this is true. So let's try this. Now with this squiggle A in place, this provisional assumption of the contrary of our goal, now go back to the regular order of business. Can I do an arrow out now? And in fact, I can do 2. Right? This is the left side of both of these. In fact, I get B, arrow out, 1 and 3. And I also get squiggle B, arrow out, 2 and 3. Great. I get both of these from this. Now let's go back to our list. Can I do another arrow out? All the arrows are done. Can I do a modus tollens? Do I have the opposite of right side somewhere? Actually, I do. But that's not going to help me just yet. Or actually, it will. So check this out. Look, so do I have the opposite of any right sides of any arrows? I do, but I don't need to do that, and I'm going to explain why in a moment. So I could take this, like, look, this B here is the contrary of the right side here. And this squiggle B here is the contrary of the right side here. Could I get modus tollens here? I could, but I don't need to, and I'm going to explain why here in a moment. Can I do an and out? No, there's no dots to and out. Can I do an and in, and should I? The answer here is yes, and here's why I didn't do the modus tollens here a moment ago. Because the goal, once you start an indirect proof, is get any two things that are contraries of each other. Or like I said, opposites. Technically, opposites is not accurate, but we can go ahead and roll with that. Get any two opposites, any two contraries, and stick them together. Do I have any contraries? Do I have any opposites? So look, B and not B. These are contraries of each other. B and not B. So what I'm going to do, like I said, the way an indirect proof works is once you start provisionally assuming the contrary of your goal is to get any two contraries and stick them together with an and in. That's a contradiction. So I've got two contraries. These two things, I've got something, and I also have the exact same thing with a squiggle in front of it. Those are contraries. So a contradiction is where you stick those two things together with a dot or with an and in. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to say here, line 6, B and squiggle B. And in 4 and 5. So mission is complete. I said here, all right, let's provisionally assume that A is not true. The goal now is to get a contradiction, get any two contraries and stick them together. We did that here just now in line 6. So when that happens, what that means is you can zoom out and say, hey, the thing that we provisionally assumed, this thing, let's pretend this thing is true. That means it is true. A is true. How? It's true indirectly. Indirect proof. Where did it start? Where did we provisionally assume the contrary of our goal? Line 3. Where did we get a contradiction? Line 6. So here's what's going on here. Here's the way an indirect proof works. Here's what you're saying. All right, we got these things. We want to get this thing. How can we get there if these other things are not working? So here's what you say. Let's pretend that the thing that we actually want is not true. That's what this squiggle is here. Okay. The thing that we actually want to get, let's pretend that it's not true. And let's see if it leads to nonsense. So what this is here in line 6, this is nonsense. We're saying something is true and its opposite is true. That's stupid. That's like saying today is Wednesday and it's not Wednesday. That's stupid talk. So what we're doing here in an indirect proof is we're saying this. If we want to prove something, let's just for the sake of argument say that its opposite or its contrary is true. If that leads to opposites being true together or contraries being true together, if that leads to contradictions, that means this thing is stupid, which means that this thing is true. That's how an indirect proof works. Now, you've done this before. If you've ever had like an argument with a friend and your friend says something, you're like, wait, if that's true, then that's like saying, and then you come up with something ridiculous, you're doing this. You're saying, hey, I'm right. Because if you're right, it means that this thing is true that's stupid. And this is stupid. Contradictions are stupid. It can't be both Wednesday and not Wednesday. 2 plus 2 cannot equal 4 and not 4 in the same axiomatic domain. Like, that doesn't make any sense. Okay, it can in other contexts. But you're saying, all right, like, if what you're saying is true, then it leads to this situation where something is true and its opposite is true, and that's stupid talk. That's what's going on here in indirect proof. This is true because if it's not, it leads to absurdity. That's why this is also called a reductio ad absurdum. Same thing. Okay? So sometimes we can use modus tollens to skip this altogether. Here there was not an option to use modus tollens. Okay, as such. There was here early on, but it just would have repeated stuff that we already got. So for example, here, if we said, oh, I've got squiggle A, and the opposite of its right side, we've got B, its opposite of its right side would be squiggle B. Oh, I can get B. Well, that's something that we already had. That's why I was avoiding doing that. That wouldn't be anything new. So this is an indirect proof. And what we're going to do now is a few more examples with all these rules in play. Double negation, modus tollens, and indirect proof.